feisty redhead, former barrister, scouse warrior woman, Kate Bentley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. So we met in the marches recently. It seems all of our guests have come on from the marches. It's been a great source of content for us. But we had our Save Our City Christmas party here in the pub on Saturday.
Yeah.
Great night.
Brilliant.
Took me a few days to recover. I was worried whether we were going to even make this podcast on time. But the enduring memory that I've got is Piers Corbyn raving at 2:30 in the morning. That's something I never thought had ever happened in my life, and I'm thankful for it. I'm glad you made it.
Oh yeah, no, it was brilliant. It was, and yeah, wouldn't have missed it.
Did you have a good time?
I had a brilliant time.
Yeah.
I don't go out that much anymore because not just because of lockdown. I'm not really into it. So what was great about it is a 30-odd like-minded people, relaxed, having fun. Seems to be a little bit of a thing of the past, that now, doesn't it? So it was good. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it really did. It was great for everyone to just be relaxed and chilling out. But it was also good to see everyone who had been involved over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and without the pressure of thinking we've got a march the next day or a protest.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it was good.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, we've got another one coming as well, haven't we?
Boxing night.
Yeah, we're not going to reveal the location of that yet, though. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So, Kate, thanks for coming on. Tell us a little bit about how you've found yourself, here with us. Tell us about getting involved with the Save Our City marches, because you've been there from the beginning, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been at every one and every single march. So my journey with truth seeking started in 2007. So what happened this year is a lot of stuff that I've been talking about for a long time. So it's a little bit of a vindication for me, because a lot of people are now going, actually, Kate's not mad. She's on it. Do you know what I mean?
It's a bit bittersweet, though, isn't it? Because you don't want your
wanna
predictions going true.
You don't want to be.
Yeah.
So I started off with the Save Our Children protests, and then the Save Our City. So I haven't missed a protest, and I've gone from being at the very back and just being an anonymous spectator to being the MC at our last one. So
which was great.
It's been a journey. It has really been a journey, and I've loved it. I've loved every minute of it. Full-time activist now.
Tell us about Save Our Children, because we haven't talked about that at all yet on the podcast. But that was the precursor.
Yeah.
It was the the events that led up to Save Our City. It was focused on like the Epstein and the Pizzagate stuff, was it, or is that?
Well, I think that was the foundation of it. But what the actual event focused on was real life people. Yeah. So there was some, I don't want to say victims, but survivors. Yeah. Some survivors sharing their experience, and, it was quite a good turnout for it as well. But once people mention Pizzagate or anything like that, you lose a lot of credibility with a lot of people, because there's only like a small section of society that actually believe that that's happening. So it was child trafficking based, human trafficking, but more. There was a lot of statistics and figures getting shared on the day about where children who go missing out of care. So it was quite local, but there were obviously banners that made reference to Pizzagate and others, and there was some negative press as a result of that, because they either didn't report it at all or reported in a really negative way.
Well, it appears that's it's the default setting, isn't it, of the media? Of any time you don't want to deal with an issue that is serious, and as serious as child trafficking is that they just call you a conspiracy theorist and hope you go away. But the world has changed. That term no longer silences people. It no longer shuts people up. In fact, it just emboldens people to keep going, doesn't it? Because you're over the target when you're called a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, and I think as well, like the whole meaning of conspiracy's been lost in translation, because if it's a conspiracy as a criminal offence, that's got people believe that, but people now automatically assume that conspiracy means false.
Well, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because we can talk about that later when we talk about your past in law. But conspiracy, criminally, you go to jail for a long time.
It's a really serious offence.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's organised crime, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I think what it is that demean it, the idea, by calling it a theory. You know, so it's like, you know, okay, you've got no evidence, this is just your opinion.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's how they try to shut you up. But I don't think it's working anymore. And I think
No.
more and more people are waking up, and I think probably due to the lockdown when they had nothing better to do than go on the internet and do some research.
Exactly, yeah. We've seen a massive shift in consciousness during that first lockdown. Loads of people just inquiring, just like, what is this, being interested in it, stuff that both you and I have probably been aware of for a long time, but people wanting to know, and actually then understanding that the world that they've lived in, that they believed was true, was actually false, and dealing with the grief of that, dealing with the isolation, you know, if your friends think you're crazy or they're not buying into it. So there was a lot of that, and I exhausted myself a little bit in the first lockdown, being a support for people who were going through that process. I had a group on Facebook and it just went nuts. And
tell us a little bit more about that.
So it was a group that I set up called Set Yourself Free, Living Outside the System. And it was initially, the objective was to be more along the lines of living sustainably, how to grow your own food, very much solution focused, which I've always shared truth, but I've always added a solution on at the end, because I think if you don't, it can be terrifying for people. So Set Yourself Free was initially that. It was set up like for about a year before. That's a couple of hundred people in there. I wasn't that consistent in sharing content. And then we went into lockdown, and there were certain documentaries that had just become the standard documentaries that people were being red pilled when they watched, you know, Fall of the Cabal and stuff like that. So in the end, we had an announcement with, you know, your starter pack, if you like, on seeking the truth. But there was a lot of...
starter pack.
Yeah, but there was a real community that developed as a result of it. And what's really interesting is that a lot of the people who I had never met before, but ended up connecting with, I then saw them at the protest and was like, oh, Joey, lovely to see you in person. Do you know what I mean? Nicola, one of the other girls, she was here on Saturday, and we'd never met until we met at the protest.
I think that's what's interesting about the protests, is that, you know, you can spend a lot of time online with people that you've never met and you chat with and you got a relationship with, but meeting them in the real world, it's so much better, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
And I think that's what's been one of the benefits of Save Our Children and then Save Our Cities. We get to meet and chat and
yeah, definitely.
So how did that move into Save Our City for you? Because Save Our City had a different set of goals, which was to, you know, oppose the lockdown, challenge the COVID pandemic narrative, you know, and you've been there from the beginning, haven't you? Now, tell me your story from watching that unfold over the past 8 weeks.
So, because it all links, Save Our Children and everything that underpins that is linked to COVID. It's all linked. It's all truth, and it all leads back to the same place. So I think when you're a committed truth seeker, that it's not an obligation, but it's a duty, if you like, to then go and take to the streets. I felt like it was an opportunity for me to walk the talk and actually go and protest against, you know, whether it was Save Our Children or whether it was Save Our City. Now, the first Save Our City event was when they closed the gyms. And there was a couple of videos going round. Remember Barry Ringside's first one, which was a standout one that went viral, where they were just like, and I was like, at last, the city is rising. Because, you know, there's that spirit within the Scouser, isn't there, that's like no other. And I'd not seen it. It was quite disheartening to see people just wearing masks and just taking it all. But there seemed to be this energy that was being created as a result of it. And okay, it was about the gyms being closed, and then the minute the gyms opened, most of those people disappeared. Which was, again, disheartening. But I'm staunch. I'm all in. So it wasn't really an option to not be there. Do you know what I mean? So on the first one, I took the kids because I had nobody to mind them, and it was a bit of a nightmare because it was just trying to keep my eyes on them, and you know. So on every other week, I managed to get the kids minded. So we went, there was the first week. Then the second week, there was, the weather wasn't great and the numbers dramatically dropped, but they'd also opened the gyms. So, you know, the numbers dropped, and I was a bit disheartened, thinking, where is everyone? You know, if I can get there,
it felt like the government and the council, gave the gyms the exemption specifically for the reason to remove them from the struggle.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
Because they knew they were forced to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
So, so on that second week, there was less numbers, weather wasn't great. And the following week after that was, there was a bit of a shift in the tone.
Yeah.
It had all been very much like peace and love, and I'm not against peace and love at all. Peacefully, yeah, definitely. But there was a bit more fire in the belly. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, a little bit more resistance, which I feel was necessary. So I got excited again then the following week. And that's when we went on the first march. We went through the city centre. We finished in Exchange Flags, is it called?
Yep,
yeah,
that's right.
We finished there. And then I was just a bit like, right, we need loads more people here next week. Like, I need to promote this more. And so then what happens in between is that we went into national lockdown on the 5th of November.
Because we were in tier 3, weren't we?
Yeah.
And that's what we were opposed to at the beginning.
Well, we were opposing all of it, but yeah.
That was the specific goal, so we had something to focus on. And then it went one step further to a national lockdown. I don't know the difference between a tier 3 and a national lockdown, mind. But yeah, go on.
But as a result of that, there was a piece in the legislation in the Coronavirus Act that prohibited us from assembling. So when you look at the European Convention of Human Rights, Article 11 is the right to assemble. And this is how clever or sneaky they've been.
Sneaky is a better term.
Yeah, sneaky is probably a better word. The only thing that precedes that is a public health crisis. So they could justify that in law. And they brought it in, and nothing's publicised on the news. You just hear about it, don't you?
So they used the public health crisis in order to suspend our fundamental human rights.
Yes.
Yeah.
All another section of this Coronavirus Act. So we then went to the usual spot, which is St George's Hall. We went there, and it was blocked off. So obviously we had to improvise then, and that's when we had a march. But that week, there was loads of us. Yeah, and it was good. And I was like, yeah, we're getting somewhere. This is more like it. If every single person just brought one extra person, you double. So I came away excited, thinking, right, this is it. The city is rising, because I know what this city is capable of. Mm-hmm. Like, when we dig our heels in until we get the outcome. Mm. You've only got to look historically at different things in order to see that. So, so I was excited. Then the following week was the week when it was a bit like Benny Hill meets New World Order, when we had the police and they were chasing us, and there was like two different locations, and it was so good. It worked. It really worked because the police didn't know what to do.
No.
And then I'd obviously finished on the cathedral steps, and then the following week was the week when the whole mood of the police was completely different. They'd set up a dispersal zone around the whole city centre. They just sort of like...
They just couldn't let happen what happened the previous week happen again.
Because we ridiculed them, that was the thing, and it was embarrassing for the police. Yeah. So I've got no doubt that they were under strict orders to do whatever it takes to stop us.
Well, at the beginning of that march, they made their presence felt when they... Mark Cummins, when they attacked him, beat him, sprayed his face with CS gas. That was at the very beginning of the march.
Yeah, well, I'd already been arrested myself by then.
There you go, right? Yeah. Took one for the team.
Yeah, they just come straight for me. I was like...
Yeah, I think that was to send a message to us.
Yeah,
they'd never done that before.
No, it was a deterrent.
It was a deterrent,
and it worked.
And it did work. Yeah, it did.
So obviously we then had a bit of a break, because I think people were just like, from my observation, what I've seen is with Save Our City, it's everybody is selflessly pursuing freedom, not just for the individuals, but for everybody. Like, the members of Save Our City's lives are practically on hold for this movement. And like, seeing that and observing that and seeing the people that are part of it, and seeing, the level of thought, organisation, when sometimes you can't be organised, you've got to improvise, but the level of consideration and just care that's going into it, because everyone cares about not just our freedom but other people's. I've loved not only witnessing it, but then also being part of that as well. Yeah, it's been great.
So we had that.
Yeah.
And then there was a week off where we went to London.
Oh yeah, but we full-time activists, we still went to London, didn't we? Which again was great.
Yeah.
Like, I loved the determination and enthusiasm you know, and obviously they've got a bigger population, so they've got the numbers. I think on a ratio, probably similar numbers to what we had in terms of like the population there. But there was one point where we were walking down Oxford Street and all 4 groups ended up joining together. And it, the power, I remember just having goosebumps.
Well, there was thousands of people in London, and the London organisers decided, you know, to copy the Liverpool COVID march, which was quite an honour, you know, and they were, you know, basically the COVID march was just, don't give notice to the police, don't give them the route, just turn up and keep moving. Right? And because that was sort of a way around the prohibition to assemble. So that's how we got around it. So they adopted that then when we were in London. They did. But what was really, not eye-opening is the wrong word, but was a bit of a spectacle was the amount of police. Never seen anything like it. There must have been about 40 police vans at one point at Hyde Park Corner with TSG, and TSG are the Territorial Support Group. They're like the real heavies of the police, the real heavies. They're like the psychos. I mean, imagine Liverpool's Matrix times 10. That's exactly. The TSG. And what did you make of that observation? Because we did a few manoeuvres where we dodged the TSG.
Because we were just like, we don't want to get arrested today, so we're going to make it our business to not get arrested. Because apparently there was 150 arrests. I don't know how accurate that number is, but I do know we did see people getting arrested. So we had a couple of moments where like we took a bit of a turn, and then we'd see them all these police marching. But I think the main moment was when we were at Hyde Park, and we just stepped back, and you could see the people were assembling, but then also just the police coming in from all angles. And as we said at the time, if that had been a normal Saturday afternoon, not national lockdown, the police wouldn't have been able to get anywhere. But they were having a field day because they could actually drive around Hyde Park and pull up.
That's an interesting observation, is that it was the central London was empty of cars, wasn't it? So they were able to move their vans around
like never before.
And
then because we stood back, you could see them sort of like regrouping or having it like being given instructions, and then like in like a staggered way approaching the crowd. But they didn't really. I think at one point the protesters kettled in the police, which was funny. But they were just trying to disperse crowds, and obviously we weren't close enough to see exactly what they were doing. But it all was very disproportionate, in my opinion. Like, you know, the arrests and the way in which they treated people was very disproportionate, especially when, you know, pre-COVID, you know, you phone the police and you wait how long for them to arrive, and then the sheer numbers of them that were available.
But you wouldn't see that many police for a terrorist instance.
Exactly.
You know, that's what surprised me.
Exactly. And I think a lot of that's for optics, to demonise the protesters from those people who were sat at home terrified.
Totally.
It's to then an opportunity to turn them against us even more so, without even understanding why we're doing what we're doing, and we're actually doing it for them as well. That's the irony, is that we're actually marching for those people as well.
So that brings us to Save Our City's final event of the year. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the final event that we did was the COVID Vigil. The COVID March, COVID Vigil. And so we decided to do that around 7 o'clock at St George's Hall steps, which was a big spectacle because of the way in which St George's Hall is lit up at the minute. And we managed to pull off a really great event. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I say every one of them is my favourite, but that was a good one.
But that was different, wasn't it? Because the national lockdown had been lifted, and this is interesting. Because there was a head of steam built up by protesters in Liverpool and London mainly, who were resisting this, you know, national lockdown. And then Johnson lifted the national lockdown. He reinstated the right to protest. And made a statement saying that vaccines will never be mandatory in Britain. It's not what we do. It's not the English thing to do. Now, I thought that was a really tactical statement, because it kind of took the wind out of our sails, or everyone's sails, because that's the main thing that people are opposed to most, is being forced to take a vaccine. So I thought that was quite a crafty, tactical, political move, and we saw the effects of that for the COVID Vigil. The police turned up mob-handed, but the numbers were down on that. But not in a bad way, but it was just, it felt like as if, okay, Well, he's lanced the boil, as it were, or he's relieved the pressure.
And I think there was a number of things as well that impacted that. I think people were in fear of the previous conduct of the police. Now, when I spoke to the police about that, they said, yeah, but it was unlawful last time. But their demeanour was completely uncalled for. So you've got people who are afraid of authority that have gone, I'm not going to go to them anymore, even if they've been previous weeks. So we also had that, in addition to the fact that Boris Johnson had made that announcement the day before. And I almost fell for it myself at one point. I was like, oh. But then I think it was for optics. I think it was to knock the wind out of the sails now that we could, legally assemble. And I also think that it made people sort of relax a little bit. So where people are being tense about it made them relax a little bit. But for me, it was basically, you might not mandate it, but you're going to make life extremely difficult for anyone who doesn't. You know what I mean? So there was talks of not being able to attend cinemas, music events, flying. Nothing really substantial that proves that. I know there was one airline that suggested it. But yeah, just I think it was a tactical move by Boris Johnson, and it definitely impacted our numbers on the night. So I think we had like 100, 150 people max there, but it was intimate, and we decided to go with the tone of pay and respect and make it more of a tribute. And it was lovely. It really was. And it was...
And you emceed that event?
I emceed that event.
You did really well. It was great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of brought us up to date with the Save Our City story and how you got here. In the meantime, we've had the vaccines been rolled out.
Yeah.
It's being... certain volunteers are willing to take it. There was a 91-year-old woman who took it first, said it was the best day of her life, and a few others. And yesterday, there was some nurse, I think it might have been Australia, she was given a vaccine, and she was talking to camera and saying how she's proud to be one of the first to take it. And then all of a sudden, she just fainted.
Yeah.
She just fainted on camera. Have you seen that? What are you...
Yeah, so I watched it once. I didn't... read any of the narrative or anything.
What did you think when you first saw it? What was your impression?
See, part of me thinks what I've observed, and Kevin, our friend, actually dubbed this whole facade as carry on corona, because everything that they seem to do, that the government try to do, seems to backfire. And I honestly feel like there's something above us that's actually taking care of us, but our job is to act, it's to take action, and that's obviously one of the reasons that prompts me to attend the protests. So when I saw that, my initial reaction was...
Life fighting back,
Yeah, it's backfired, because she was so pro COVID vaccine, she was up
visually,
for it.
It's so damaging for their cause, regardless of what they say about it, because the first reaction from pro-vaxxers, and I'm neither pro or anti, right? That's not my position, right? But the pro-vaxxers, or the pro-COVID vaccine specifically, they were saying it was faked. And so they were saying it was a conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah.
But that was countered by the nurse herself when she came back, and she said, no, it was a vagus reaction.
Yeah.
Vagus reaction, apparently, I've been advised, is, you get given a needle or something like that, and then maybe a couple of minutes later, you'll have a delayed reaction.
Yeah.
But that reaction is not 17 minutes later.
Yeah.
So by saying that, she's discounted the idea that it's a setup, because she's continuing to say, no, it was something else that's happened.
Yeah.
But her argument about being a vagus reaction is debunked by the evidence. So,
exactly.
Like you say, I think it's another nail in the coffin for their narrative.
Yeah, and it's like it's clinging together on a tiny piece of string, as far as I can see. But I'm well aware that not everybody sees it the way that I see it. But I look at it, and a lot of the time I'm looking with everything they do, and I honestly feel like I'm in the Truman Show, and I'm like, can nobody else see how blatant this is?
Well, it's the Emperor's New Clothes,
It's the Emperor's New Clothes.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It is. But what's comforting and reassuring is more and more people going,
he's naked.
Yeah, basically, yeah. You know, realising that none of this adds up. None of this makes sense. The rules don't make sense. And, people are starting to realise even the tiers with the councils, that's money-based. That's not really to do with cases. And, none of it adds up.
Well, that brings me on to another idea that has popped into my head recently, which is over the last week, 2 weeks, for me at least, is that the news is becoming more and more dominated by the Chinese Communist Party and their role in not only Corona, because it's come from China.
Yeah.
Like Trump says, it's China virus.
Yeah.
So there's that to consider. But it seems as if every day there's some new information being released about the Chinese Communist Party's move to world domination.
Yeah, infiltrate the West.
Is becoming more and more apparent every day, and it makes, these news items that are being released to the public are giving more credence to the idea of, COVID being a part of the Chinese Communist agenda. I don't know for sure. But one news item struck me specifically this week, which was that it's been leaked that there are 2 million Chinese Communist Party spies in the US and the UK. Yeah. Now, that was like, wow, something we knew anyway. But to
see it in the news like that, like to see it being leaked.
Yeah.
It's
when it comes out in the mainstream media, even though we don't agree with the mainstream media, it's difficult for the other side to say that it's bullshit, right? So it's come out in the mainstream media that there are spies in the UK. So how many Chinese communist spies are in Liverpool?
Good question.
Right. What level of infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party with the COVID operation are in Liverpool? And, we see people like Joe Anderson, Labour Party, we know the Labour Party's connection to the Communist Party. What are your thoughts on that? Because we see the Chinese Communist Party own all companies in China, and we're seeing lots of Chinese investments in Liverpool. I mean, like massive Chinese investments in Liverpool, whether it's the docks through Peel Holdings, their front company, or whether it's through property developments in Liverpool city centre and all the high rises, or it's the mass influx of Chinese students. And then, we've got Joe Anderson at the middle of all that. What are your... What's your take on that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because what I've observed is they're using the heritage of the connection, with Chinatown and all of that. They're using that as leverage in a way to make it appealing.
Liverpool's got the oldest Chinese community in Europe. It's 200 years old.
Yeah.
So they're well embedded here.
Exactly. But the way that I see it is because Liverpool is very much a socialist city. And in my opinion, obviously, socialism leads to communism. So it's a great manipulation tactic, if you like, to infiltrate the UK through one of the major cities, with Liverpool using the connection with the heritage and the investors and everything else, using all of that as leverage. That's what I'm observing happen at the minute.
So at some point, we've got to ask some questions about
absolutely.
the connection to the Chinese Communist Party in Liverpool, and what's really going on here. I mean, we don't have the answers. We're just shooting the breeze here.
Yeah. But I think we obviously already had an understanding of that. But then, over the last week or so, it's
all come out.
It's all come out. And then, again, it's one of those things that we've spoke about that's then become true, because people see it as truth. If it then goes into the mainstream, isn't it?
What do you think about Joe Anderson being arrested for corruption and intimidating witnesses? Obviously, it's just an allegation, and the police are pursuing that. But from your legal background and what we know about the situation, what's your take on it?
So for me, I think it's absolutely obvious that Joe Anderson is riddled with corruption. Like, I see that just from my observations. So when he was arrested, it was like very 2020, like anything can happen in 2020. Then the next minute, the mayor's been arrested for conspiracy.
Well, it was funny, wasn't it? Because he was like a bit of a focal point of Save Our City. It was like at one point there was a demonstration outside the town hall saying Joe must go, and then from left field, Joe Anderson gets arrested.
I know, it's funny. But then at the same time, understanding how the criminal justice system works and how intertwined it is, and the injustice that exists within that, I'm not convinced that he is actually going that he's actually going to go to prison.
I don't think so either. But it's being arrested for those charges is damaging enough.
It really is, and the way that I see it is how you do anything is how you do everything. So it's what it's allowed for, for things that observations we've already made, and people thinking, why are they saying Joe must go because they don't understand? But bringing that into the spotlight has made people go, oh, right.
What else did he write about?
Yeah. Vindicated left, right and centre.
Totally. And it's not only is Joe Anderson being arrested, but his sidekick and partner in crime, Derek Hatton, who was a famous Trotskyite of Liverpool City Council in the 1980s. You know, it's made it a really tasty story, and I'm interested to see what's going to happen next week.
Definitely. It's like you need soaps when you've got this going on.
So tell me a bit about, you know, you're an ex-barrister or former barrister, which is a really interesting title to hold. Yeah. How did that come about? But before we get there, tell me a little bit about growing up in Liverpool.
Yeah.
You know, your mum and dad, and your dad's a staunch red. Tell us about that.
So I grew up in Kensington till I was about 10. And just had a really sort of run-of-the-mill working class upbringing, you know, playing out in the street. All of our family all lived in all the surrounding areas, so we were like a bit of a fame. You either loved us or loathed us, do you know what I mean? And then when we were about 10, my dad moved us to Chilwell. So for people who don't know the difference, it's like Kensington is like as rough as it gets, and you know, Chilwell's a little bit posher, isn't it? Yeah, and even more so back then.
Yeah.
Like, so I always tell the story that when we went, because obviously we lived right by town, so like we'd go out, we were going to town when we were about 6. And then when I moved to Chilwell, the kids couldn't even cross the street, and I was like, I've been going to town since I was 6. So that was a bit of
culture
a culture
shock for you or for them?
Both. Both. So we were rough when we got there. People are a bit like that of us. But I think what my dad did cleverly is he had us in Kenny for as long enough for us to be streetwise, and then took us out for us to then move more to the south end, for us to then be more that way inclined. Just
so you had a bit of both? I
had a bit of both, and I'm really, really grateful for that, because I know it's a big part of who I am. Growing up in the north end in comparison to the south end, my sister's 12 years younger than me. She's only ever lived in the south end.
Okay.
So she's like a fish out of water if she comes down to town. She goes up to the north end. But I've had both, so I've got love for both as well. But I think it laid a really good foundation, because in addition to that as well, like my dad sent me to karate, so I went to the Red Triangle where Tony Moran went. So I went there for about 10 years as well.
The Red Triangle's just around there. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's derelict now, isn't it? The sign's still there, but it's a bit of a legend in Liverpool. But
so I went there, and my dad sent me there so that I could look after myself. I could defend myself. And again, I hated him for it at the time. Yeah. But then in later life, found myself not afraid. You know, when I'm out and about, I'm not afraid of confrontation or being able to take care of myself. So although, like I say, I was not happy with my dad at the time, there was definitely benefits that I've still got now from doing that. So so then I went to St. Julie's High School in Moulton Village, and then from there I did my A-levels, and then I went to John Moores. And when I was at John Moores, I studied criminal justice.
Why did you study that? It's an interesting thing to do.
I randomly selected a sociology A-level, and like come top of the class in this A-level, and it sort of came quite naturally to me, because I don't really remember trying that hard, but I got like a really good grade. And some of the topics within that were to do with crime and criminology. So I was interested in it. So that was what I decided to do as my degree. So I went to do that then at John Moores. And when I did that, you did a lot of sociology core topics, which was about like the basis of sociology, so like Karl Marx, Durkheim, stuff like that. And then all of the other topics.
So they were teaching you Marx on a criminal justice course.
Yeah, but I
loved it.
No, but I didn't see it for what it was at that time. Do you know what I mean? I was just like, well, this is new. Yeah. And I'm very inquisitive and question everything, and that's what sort of sociology and criminology are about, is questioning where it comes from, why people commit crime, all of that sort of stuff. So this like studying
almost psychology, the motive of criminals.
Yeah. So it's like psychology, but psychology is the individual, sociology is society in general.
Yeah.
So I started that, and then I just naturally leant towards the women-specific topics because I was just quite interested in them.
Were you quite interested in them, or do you think there was a push within the faculty in order to, adopt those women's studies, as it were?
Yeah, and I think, and it's funny because they get ridiculed, those women's studies, like the pointless. And I just do agree, to be honest. But what I do recall is that when I got to university and I was learning all of these just about this information, I was then became aware or was told that like inequality between men and women, I'd never experienced that up until that point. So I was like 18 years of age. I never really, or not consciously experienced it.
So this was in relation to you studying criminology.
Yeah.
And crimes.
Yeah.
And then they were adding into the mix the inequality or alleged inequality between men and women.
Yeah. So there was like a women's health.
Do you think that was relative to criminology, or do you think it felt a little bit out of place?
At the time, I was like fascinated by this information that I wasn't aware of. So like even, men earn more than women was like one of the major things that I remember learning. And I remember thinking, do they? So
feminism had found its way into criminology.
Yeah. And now I understand that that's not actually accurate to say that men earn more than women. They do, but only because women come out of the labour market when they have children.
So it's relative.
Women who don't have children, which is becoming more commonplace now, actually earn more than men. But it's just that, like, that statement that people say, and then all of a sudden women are up in arms that there's in some way hard done to or oppressed. So
the victimhood is created and fostered at that level.
That was my personal experience, 100%, is that, like, I left university with a chip on my shoulder as a female.
One on each shoulder, one being a scouser and one being a Viva.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And, yeah, like, I wouldn't say that I was not so much anti-man, because I have always had like loads of men or male friends, even all of my life. More, I can be a man. That was like what I believed. It's embarrassing now when I think about it, but it was more, I can do anything that a man can do.
So this was a different Kate that went into university that came out.
Yeah, I'd say so, because what that also prompted then is, because I was being told that women are oppressed, I'm thinking back to my childhood and going, oh, yeah, remember that? Oh, yeah. And then convinced myself that it was...
Confirmation bias, looking for anything to confirm it.
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when I reflect on that and I look back, I feel like I was prime for, being in education when I was, in state education, lower education. Girls were being told that girls are excelling and boys are failing. I always remember that being at the overrides. Mantra. Yeah, like the mantra that within the schools. And I was in an all-girls school, but I just remember, and we touched on it then when I did the sociology A level, so I remember that as well. And so it was almost like we were being primed for that, to then go into the universities and then be told that women are oppressed. So not only can you excel, but you're oppressed, so you've got something to prove because you're excelling. Do you know what I mean? And so I left university, like, determined to be just like a man, if you like. But the shift in the career came from my dissertation that I did.
What was that on?
So I did a dissertation on women who kill when they've been victims of domestic violence, and I absolutely loved it.
Sounds heavy.
Got a first in it, loved it. Was like, I had me tutor up the wall, but she loved it because there's a lot of students that just wasn't interested. That was just
crimes of passion.
Yeah. But what the conclusion of that dissertation is that the Homicides Act is out of date. It was written by men for men, and the defences of the Homicides Act were not aligned with the attributes of a female. So you've got provocation or diminished responsibility. So with provocation, because the very elements of the offence are that it's a sudden loss of self-control. So because a lot of the cases that were going to the court where it had been a domestic violence issue, it was more of cumulative and the straw that broke the camel's back rather than this sudden loss.
Wasn't having the criminal mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that meant that, so the the sort of the twofold aspect of that is that it was the reasonable man, an ordinary man would have a sudden loss of self-control, and it was so grave that so it's like an objective and a subjective. So I don't know can't remember the exact words, but it was an objective and a subjective twofold test. And as a result of that, because those didn't apply to a woman, there was a lot of women who were going into basically coming away with murder charges because they weren't saying that they were mad, which is diminished responsibility, but they didn't fit in with the principles of provocation. So what that then meant, the knock-on effect of that is when women...
So provocation would allow them to have a manslaughter charge rather than murder, yeah?
Yeah, which dramatically brings down the sentence.
Of course.
But not only that, it also, when you then do get released, you know, having a murder charge on you, you know, when you're trying to apply for a job and rehabilitate yourself in comparison to manslaughter, there's a huge difference in perception of what that is.
From your dissertation, you believe there were a lot of miscarriages of justice in relation to the homicide issue,
Yeah. So that was the conclusion. And then there was like a group of women who were arguing for cumulative provocation that was becoming a thing at that time. So I obviously covered a bit of that.
Cumulative provocation?
The straw that broke the camel's back.
So it's built
a different
up over
element,
time. Yeah.
And there was one particular barrister who was really sort of like pushing for those changes. So as a result of that, I thought I'm going to go into law. And that's how I ended up practicing or studying and practicing, yeah.
Wow, a great motivation to go into law. So,
very naive, though.
So tell us about that, you know, because you went from university in Liverpool, you moved to London to study law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I initially went to Chester to convert my criminal justice degree over to a law degree. So there was that. I did that first, and then I moved to London to do the BVC, which is the Bar Vocational Course.
Tell us about that.
So, yeah, you know what, when I went to do that, I'd sort of like...
Is this where you go to the Inns of Court, or is that later?
Yeah, no, you go into the Inns of Court.
Yeah.
You become a member of the Inns of Court.
And tell us about the Inns of Court, because for me, they're like a really mysterious, ancient, idea in Britain, based in the city of London, yeah? Tell us about the Inns of Court.
So the Inns of Court, there's 4 of them, and you basically pay to become a member. And then they have like... So
it's a private organisation?
It's a private organisation, and they have like dinners, events.
So how did you find that, being a fish out of water, being from Liverpool in the north, to like the ultimate of the British establishment, the Inns of Court? I mean, what was your experience there?
First of all, I think it was a little bit naive as to what I was getting myself into.
Yeah.
Then being a fish out of water was really challenging for me, because... my mate Amin, who we met in the Inns of Court, he was actually in a different college. So the college I was in, I was the only person who had an accent, let alone a scouse accent. And it was all very judgmental, and I could see people sniggering and stuff, you know, when I was speaking, and it really made me feel uncomfortable. And it knocked me confidence as well. So up until that point, I pretty much just, everything I did well at. I didn't really have to try that hard. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a situation, where I'm away from home. I'm the only person who talks like this, and I feel like I'm being judged as a result of it. Do you know what I mean? But by the end of the course, everyone loved listening to me talk, because they'd say it was far more interesting to listen to a Scouser than listen to someone who's just monotone and just...
But you're the novelty, aren't you, a little bit? It's just like, let's see you dance.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a couple of run-ins with people as well over that. But
I felt the same, because I used to live in London. I was a filmmaker for a certain period of my life, and I made music videos, and that's a very, very middle class dominated industry.
Yeah.
And the way they dominate that industry is by their kids who they put in there. They work for free to begin with, because that's the way in. So it keeps the riffraff out, if you know what I mean.
Definitely, and they can afford to, because they're getting paid an allowance by the parents,
exactly.
So they can do work for free. Whereas we didn't have that.
No, and that's what I felt was something that was definitely a thing, is the accent. It's for London, and especially the middle classes. It's something that either they are intrigued by or intimidated by.
Yeah. And I did find that, like, even with... So I had a bit of an issue with the accent.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely determined to never suppress it. Because it's part of my identity and it's part of who I am. And
it's just when you get drunk, it comes out even 10 times more.
Yeah, that's why I was weary with the wine. Weary with the wine when I was in Lincoln's Inn. But so I had, like, there'd be some people that would say to me, yeah, if you need, because you always go, well, what's your top tip? Lose your accent would be what people would say a lot. But then also I met loads of amazing people who would go, don't lose your accent, keep your accent. And I had a mentor who was a friend of my dad's called Colin Wells, amazing barrister, but he was from Bow Bells. So we spoke with a really thick Cockney accent, like true Cockney. And he was a West Ham fan of a weekend. He's still my friend now. West Ham fan of a weekend, barrister through the week.
Hooligan at the weekend, yeah, barrister during the week.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
But he helped me a lot, and he didn't lose his accent. So he always used to reassure me a little bit, but it definitely set me back. It definitely made me very conscious of something that I was never conscious of. So I don't know whether it was probably a good thing, because I probably had a little bit too much confidence. I might have even been borderline arrogant. Do you know what I mean? So it was a bit like, yeah, definitely. But it knocked me to the point that I had to rebuild myself. And I decided to just stick with the accent, but just slow down. Pronounce me words properly. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then I'd spend a weekend back in Liverpool and I'd be like, let's have a go back.
So what was you focusing on in the Inns of Court? I mean, is that just like another university? What's the structure there? Do you specialise in a certain area of law, or do you learn, the fundamentals of law? What's the sketch?
So the Inns of Court now are very much just based on convention. So they have the events that go on, all very traditional. So you can imagine all the traditional council dress with the wigs and the gowns and dinners. My idea of hell, to be honest with you. So I didn't really engage that much with Inns of Court. But there was a bit of an obligation.
So that's not where you study?
No, there's a bit of a misconception that you do, but you have to be a member of at least one, and there's several events that you have to attend each year. So some people would be like skipping to those events. I'd be like, if I can avoid it, I will. Do you know what I mean? So that was with the Inns of Court. But in the college itself, the classrooms were mock courtrooms. So it really got you. And what they used to do is they used to film you and then let you and your classmates watch you back while your classmates critiqued you. That was
heavy.
Hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hell. But like a bit of a what's the words I'm looking for? Like a bit of a crash course in like losing your ego. Do you know what I mean? Like being able to take criticism and have that feedback. I remember one of my bosses used to say that I couldn't take criticism. By the time I come out of that college course, I was like, say what you want. But it was good. It was constructive. It was constructive, and it made me overcome a lot of fears as well. There was this one day where we had to prepare a bail application over lunch, and I decided to just stay on the phone to my boyfriend instead. And it just showed me that it was a big wake-up call that I couldn't wing it. Because then I went in, camera on, didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I was saying. And then obviously the rest of the class had a field day with pulling that apart. But a big lesson learned not to do that.
So at what point did you specialise in, because you became a criminal barrister?
Yeah, so I always wanted to specialise in crime. So what was happening in the industry at the time is that in Liverpool, the chambers, you sort of did a bit of everything. Whereas the culture in London was that you became specialised. So I was happy to do that, because no other area of law really interested me except for criminal law. And everyone used to say to me, there's no money in it. And I used to go, don't care. Thinking that I was going to pay me bills with passion. Do you know what I mean? And it wasn't. What happened as well to the industry is after I'd left college for about 6 months, they massively overhauled the whole criminal justice system, restructured.
Is this when they stopped legal aid?
They didn't stop it as such, but they took £1 billion out of it.
Yeah.
So they changed the means test. Everything then from a barrister's perspective was fixed fee. So you used to get paid for reading, for waiting, for travelling, for speaking. You used to get paid per page, but all of that stopped and it went to a fixed fee. So as a result of that, what was happening is they were trying to make it a fused profession, like an attorney over in America. So a lot of firms folded, a lot of solicitors' firms folded, and then also a lot of the solicitors got rights of audience, higher rights, so that they could then go and do the advocacy.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because direct access was something was that at that time, was it?
Yeah.
Because the tradition in UK, in Britain, was that you couldn't get near a barrister. You had to go through a solicitor to get to the barrister. That was the buffer in between, wasn't
convention.
The convention.
It's all built on convention.
Yeah. And then the barrister would be the one that argued in court, and the solicitor would prepare the brief, prepare the case.
So you've got the litigation and the advocacy, and also there's the cab rank rule as well. So
that's
the barrister would have to take the case.
So to explain that, because that's interesting.
Yeah, so the cab rank rule is basically if a case lands on you, you've got no choice over what cases you do basically. So although that convention still exists, the clerks tend to
give the best
cases to who they like, and you know, so they tend to override that in their own way, but there is still nevertheless the cab rank rule.
And so the direct access change in the law allowed the client to deal directly with the barrister on the one hand, and on the other hand the solicitor now had right of audience where he was previously not allowed to argue or talk to the judge. So that must have been quite revolutionary in the whole legal setup.
It was massive, and for me being so newly qualified at the time, it was probably the worst point in history to ever go and practice and qualify as a barrister.
So did that leave you a little bit lost in which direction to go or what to do?
Yeah, because I felt like, because of the accent and the fact that I didn't have a degree from Oxford or Cambridge, I was swimming against the tide as it was anyway. I was just like, just get me an interview. If you give me an interview, you know, I'll know that I'll be able to, you know, win you over in an interview. Because I didn't have those credentials, that really went against me as well. And I didn't appreciate that when I was choosing university. I just thought, oh, well, just stay at home, don't want to go away. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really think of it like that. I was the first person in my family to go to university, so there was no wisdom passed down from anybody about it.
So what did you do? What route did you take in terms of your legal practice?
What I did initially is I got a job in a solicitor's. So I had like initiative, work ethic, really strong work ethic. So on the first day, bear in mind, I think they were paying me 13 grand. That was my salary. And on the first day, the previous Friday, a solicitor had left. So I just took a caseload as a clerk, but basically doing the solicitor's job. So me being me was just in at the deep end, cracking on with these rape cases, murder cases, just sort of learning as I go. But what I then realised, because I'd come from this like really nice environment working in Barclays where my manager was dead fair, to then working in this solicitor's firm where they saw that as an opportunity to exploit, as opposed to, so they manipulated my desire to show what I was capable of. So they were paying me a clerk's salary, and I was doing the work of a solicitor basically. So there was that, and then what was happening then is, so then I went into pupillage and into chambers, and then what was happening is, because there was no work, well, there wasn't any work for junior, or there was, but it was hard, and you're fully self-employed. So whenever you go to court, the solicitor doesn't have to pay you till that case is concluded, and then they don't have to pay you until 30 days after that, and then they just don't. So you're chasing them. So it's like, if you haven't got a buffer, if that's how you're earning your money, and it's just cases here and there, it just wasn't viable. It was very stressful. So there was a bit of a trend to start bringing qualified counsel in-house. So what that basically meant is that you were employed as counsel. So
what kind of workflow would that include? Would that be preparing cases, drafting documents, drafting legal arguments?
Advices and stuff, so advice to the client. So the solicitor would pass work to the barrister like that. And advocacy. So it worked out better for the solicitor than to continuously be paying barrister fees. They just had a salary. But the run-of-the-mill cases for me, and the run-of-the-mill cases probably for anybody who does that like type of work, is common assault, domestic common assault.
Is it just inundated with them?
Standard. It's just like your bread and butter, basically.
Did you find them a bit boring?
Well, I did, but I used to have I used to play a little bit of a game with myself, right, where you'd get the papers and you'd look at like the facts, and I'd have an idea of what the client was going to be like in my head before I got there, and I was 100% way off all of the time, like 100% record. So it was a little bit boring, but the irony of the fact that I'm then defending domestic common assault perpetrators.
It's the other way around.
But it also did make me see the other side of the story. Like, a lot of the time, these people were adamant that the allegation was fabricated and it wasn't true. Do you know what I mean?
And how did you find that? How did you, the emotional connection of being an advocate or being a solicitor or a lawyer dealing with the client who's claiming he's innocent or not? I mean, how did you find that relationship? It
was a struggle. So there was like a historical rape case that I was dealing with, and like it gave me nightmares and everything. But it's almost like a rite of passage, like an initiation that you have to go through to then detach, emotionally detach. So
and that was the case that did it.
That was the case that did it. So I had terrible nightmares about it. But then,
was you haunted by the actual crime or dealing with the criminal?
What haunted me is that when I visited the client in Pentonville prison, he was lovely. He was dead gentle and dead sweet. And then when you saw the evidence,
was he on remand?
He was remanded in custody. So when you saw the evidence, he was like in his 80s at this point. When you saw the evidence, it was his family members, and like being like, how can someone can be that sweet? I've done all of these things. Do you know what I mean?
Quite a challenging.
So it was morally, it was a massive deal for me. But then what I had to do is push through and completely emotionally detach. So if you'd have met me at that time, you could have told me the most horrific thing happened to you, and I'd have just gone. And then, like, part of me transitioning from no longer practicing was that I didn't want to be emotionless.
Because I've found that I've had quite a bit of experience with barristers, and they are a different breed.
Yeah.
They are emotionless and detached, and I wonder how they do it. But that's a good insight, isn't that? It's just the experience that does it.
Yeah. Yeah. And they just become names on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And it just becomes that the minute you step out and you're no longer working, that you forget. But me being me, I'd have like the client's wife ringing me at 3 a.m. I was like a social worker and everything as well, because I felt sorry for everyone. But it was emotionally taxing on me.
Yeah.
It wasn't, like when I look back at that part of my life now, because I was constantly surrounded by negativity, a lot of things changed in my personal life, like just like people dying and other stuff going on that all coincided with that part of my life, that part of my career. But there was a pinnacle moment where I thought, I can't do this forever. And it was like a 4-handed rape case, and there was like a co-counsel all having a drink after the trial, and she had like really massive bags, like literally shopping bags under her eyes. She must have clocked me looking at them. She was just like, this is what 15 years of criminal law does for you. And I just thought,
I don't want to end up like that.
No.
And that was it.
And then I was planning my escape. I was like, because I'd become a bit of a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
That was the issue with specialising. I couldn't go into any other area of law, really, because I wasn't specialised in it. So then it was the possibility of retraining. And I just...
Had enough.
At that point, I'd had enough of learning. And now I'm still lifelong learner now, but I just needed a bit of a break. But I did get there and think, this isn't what I expected it to be.
What's your lasting impression of the justice system in the UK? I mean, we project to the world that we've got the best legal system, in the world. What are your thoughts on that? What's your lasting impression of that?
My lasting impression is the corruption that exists within that as well. The disproportionate sentences that are given for particularly sex offences, whilst drug cases are treated with huge contempt, and they're met with massive sentences. But noticing the difference, because in London, the emphasis at that time was so much more about terrorism. So you had like your run-of-the-mill domestic violence, your street robberies. I did quite a lot of them because I was quite good with the youth, the youth offenders, and then terrorism. So terrorism was like drugs in Liverpool. It was like that made what are they called? The TSG. That emphasis, massive emphasis on that. But just seeing also as well, like with the industry, I found like a lot of the barristers, a lot of the people, there was a lot of incompetency, and it's really difficult to make it to even get to the point where you're standing on your feet in court. The level of incompetence used to just drive me mad. But the soulless attitude of the barristers
and
was
arrogant as well.
Yeah, like I remember this one occasion where there was and obviously you're speaking a lot through an interpreter in London as well, because there's obviously multicultural. And there was a Brazilian guy, so there was a Portuguese interpreter there, a Brazilian guy, and then the barrister. I was just doing a mini pupillage at the time, so I was just learning. And I would always speak to the client and just allow the interpreter to speak over us. But look them in the eye. Whereas he addressed the interpreter, and when the client went to talk, he just stuck his hand in his face. And I was just like, why would you, like, that's really, really rude. So there's no empathy is what I experienced as well. And they don't care.
No.
They don't care about justice. They care about getting paid. So I didn't have a great impression when I left. I remember being really fearful of judges, and then just having them and holding them in a completely different light by the end. Just watching them, just depends what side of the bed they've got out of. But definitely the biggest thing for me was the disproportionate sentences for what the offences are. Like, it was very, very clear that sex offences were treated really leniently. A lot of suspended sentences.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that this system, crushes drug issues so harshly, but lets sex offences, child sex offences, off so leniently? What do you think is going on there?
I think with drugs, there's no tax on it, is there? So there's a big
war on the competition.
Well, yeah. So there's that, and that's why I think they throw the book at with drug offences. But this also with where the sex offences are concerned, you've only got to go and look in mainstream headlines. Search one of the mainstream the tabloid newspapers, and you will see loads and loads of articles of members of parliament, councillors who've actually been arrested and charged with child abuse offences, and a lot of them get treated really leniently. So what I'm getting at is it's ingrained within the elite as far as I'm concerned. That's in my experience. That's the way that I see it.
Did you see that then as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that seemed pretty obvious to me, and it was one of the major things that for my own truth-seeking journey that then prompted me to then delve and to dig into that.
You're a bit of an insider, really, aren't you? You know.
But I never ever felt like one. This was the thing. I always felt like a square peg in a round hole. Like, I never ever felt like I could really be myself. And I look back now and I really strive to live authentically now, and look at how inauthentically I had to be just on a daily basis, and think, I wouldn't go back to that. I'd have a completely different attitude towards it if I went back to it now, because I'd be more rooted in who I am and more confident in it. But when you're looking up to these people and you're thinking, is that what I'm aspiring to be? That? No empathy, no soul, emotionless. And it wasn't for me. And at that time, I didn't have children, but I was aware of a lot of barristers who had children, and then we were under a lot of pressure to get back to work. And I always wondered how they dealt with that, because once you become a mum, your whole outlook on everything just changes. So, dealing with really serious offences, really graphic detail, and dealing with some of the most dangerous people, and the most, sinister, and then having to go home and put your babies to bed. Do you know what I mean? So I'd managed to get out of it by the time I had kids, which was a blessing.
Because that's, I think they've done a few tests, psychopath tests on various industries, and find out where psychopaths tend to cluster. And the legal industry seems to be rife at the top. Yeah. So that brought that chapter to a close. But you became a mum as well, didn't you, while you were in London?
Yeah.
And you met your partner, Jay.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about how
now
that came
ex-partner,
about.
But me and my mate Amin, who were met in Inns of Court, we'd signed up for this pro bono public speaking course on a Saturday morning to practice our advocacy skills. But we kept getting drunk on the Friday night and not turning up. So this 1 week, after paying for it about 5 times, we were like, look, we are definitely going. We're definitely going this week. So we'd been into the West End, met our other scouse mate, because there's like a load of scousers down there, met our other scouse mate, had one drink, went home, got on the tube, and we're sitting there made up with ourselves thinking, we're actually going home here. This is great. Then I come out the station, phoned my friend and was like, do you want a cheeseburger? Going past McDonald's. And as I'm talking on the phone, Jay went, Scouser, like that. Do you want to come for a drink? So me just went, yeah. And we went for a drink. And then I think I ended up there till about 7 in the morning. Never went on the course. But was like, what were their names? I couldn't even remember. But we'd had a ball, we'd had a laugh. And then I remember telling my friends in college and they were like, and you went? I was like, yeah, he was a scouser. Practically
That's
my
what
brother.
we do.
Yeah. It's like this unwritten code, isn't it? If you meet a scouser outside Liverpool, you're instantly friends, aren't you? So, but then I met him the next day. When I first met him, he had like a big, long beard. And I remember thinking, he's about 50. And then I met him the next day and he's had a shave and he was 26. And then we just became friends, and then we ended up in a relationship, and we were together for 12 years all together, lived in London. And then when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was just like, London. I think with London, it's feast or famine. You're either scraping the barrel, or you're really well off. And I was like, I don't want to be isolated, and I don't want to be just getting by bringing up me daughter. So we moved back, much to Jay's disappointment. He
didn't want to go?
He had no intentions of going back. He saw it as a step back and was like, no. But what he also did is he trained to go and work on the rigs. So when I came back, he wasn't here a lot of the time. So I reluctantly settled back into Liverpool, and I think I spent the first 3 years of being back going, I hate it here. I hate it here. I want to go back to London. And then I just had a bit of a realisation. It was like, you hate it because you keep saying you hate it. Like, stop saying that.
I lived in London for like 10 years, so off and on. You know, we came back home, and I don't miss it. I don't miss it at all now. Yeah, no. Well, I went back then with Bria in the car, my daughter, and I was like, oh, I hate this. Yeah. And then I'd completely fell out of love. So I go and have a little visit. Sometimes I hate it. Other times I go, like when we went, I really enjoyed it. But I've got no desire to go and live there again at all. So we've been back here since then. So how did motherhood change her? So obviously, me being, I don't want to say anti-man because that's not the right one, but being a feminist basically. And was you like a hardcore feminist? Not like bra-burn and like that type, not like neo-feminist. Describe your feminist attitude. Feminist attitude was like, I can do everything a man can do. So pure independence. Yeah, so like even when I first met Jay, I was like, look, I don't want you to buy me a drink. 50-50. Why do you think you took that attitude? Is that anything that your mum or dad instilled in you? Or? Not really. I think that I saw it as a weakness. Yeah. It was definitely a weakness, and I didn't want to be weak. I wanted to be a strong, independent woman. And how did Jay find that? Did he comply or...? No, he did comply. Yeah. But then I started to throw it back in his face, and he was like, well, hang on a minute, this is what you wanted. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I never ever wanted him to look after me. I never wanted to do the things that just the women do. I wanted it all 50-50, and I honestly feel like that doesn't work. And I only know that from trying to live it and seeing how it doesn't work, because from a polarity perspective, energetically, if I'm in my masculine energy all of the time and he's in his masculine energy, then there's no polarity, so we're just friends. We're just friends, except we couldn't bear each other in the end. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it wasn't good. And I only once I became a mum, and I really stepped into the rite of passage of becoming a mum and that womanhood. It was only then that I was a bit like, well, where's the masculine? Where is he? But by that time, he'd had you'd beat it out of him. Yeah, I'd emasculated him. So how? Because this is interesting, isn't it? Because your story that you've told us so far is, you went to uni at the age of 18 and you were introduced to these new ideological ideas that you hadn't considered before, and made you question your past and your youth and growing up and asking, did that really happen? And it developed you into this,
that I was oppressed and I had an axe to grind.
Which even it propelled you into an entire career. This ideology that was instilled in you in university propelled you into the law.
Definitely.
And then you had children, you were in a relationship, and you were starting to question those ideas. So because I think that's a really interesting story, and I think it might be common to a lot of women. Is that they find out these things maybe when it's too late after the fact, and maybe you regret it.
And one of the things that I really noticed when I was working in law is how dissatisfied and unfulfilled I was. I was like, is this it? Is this really what I sacrificed so much for in terms of like the studying and the late nights, and is this it? So, and I think that a lot of women feel the same. Because the way that in my awareness now that I know is that structure, that system is very much based on a man. So, where in my opinion as well, is that where the true oppression has come from, it actually came from the women's liberation movement, the second women's liberation movement.
Quite controversial in these modern times.
I know, and I might get a bit of backlash, but I don't really care. Because in my observation, the second wave of feminism was actually funded by the Rockefellers. So it was again a prime example of the mainstream, the state, whatever you want to call them, telling us how to feel. So telling us that we're oppressed. Women, for example, were oppressed in the workplace, and so this push to put women into top jobs. What I always think is, well, where did the men go that were in those jobs before that? But what nobody really prepared women for is the fact that you're the nurturer. Biologically, you are the nurturer. So women are either putting families off, or when they do,
hand the kids over to a stranger to bring up.
Hand the kids over to a stranger, or huge resentment for their male counterpart in the relationship, because it's like, well, you only go to work. I do all of this and go to work. But we're in this world now where women have got more opportunities than ever before, which is amazing in some respects.
Quite right too, yeah.
It's amazing in some respects, but also...
But there seems to be a war on the family, and it seems that feminism has created the ideological divide in not just the workplace, in the home.
Absolutely.
So that we're at war with each other rather than being unified, which is, this idea that, women have been the slaves of men throughout history, and that's what the foundation of feminism is. It's totally false. There's no way that we could have even achieved anything unless we're partners, co-equal partners.
It completely takes away any of the benefit that existed within that partnership. And I'm not saying that some things didn't need to change,
of course,
but there's definitely things that we can learn from the past that we can bring into the modern day. So where this attack on the family is, and also with the feminism movement, it's now there's the women have become used to the standard of living has got to the point where you need 2 incomes.
But they've deliberately done that.
Of course,
they've lowered the standard of the standard of income, the standard of living,
and increased the standard of living.
To force both people to go out to work. Otherwise, it wouldn't work, would it? Because you'd say, you stay home, mind the kids, bring the kids up, and I'll go home. I'll go out, bring home the bacon, and we can do it that way.
And what I found really fascinating is that, like, I had Bria when I was 30, but I was almost denying that key part of a woman to produce life. And there was, we were told that it was a burden. That's what we were told, that motherhood was a burden because it took you out of the labour market.
It's fucking sick, isn't it?
It's madness. It's absolute madness. So it wasn't until I then became a woman and I just took to it like a duck to water and was like, immersed myself in it. I breastfed. I was very educated myself and became really informed on vaccines and then developed a strong opinion on that. But the main thing is that what you touched on before, where right now for women, it's all about, have the baby, get them in their own room, get back to work, get yourself back, get you back into your jeans, and
Go out
all
with
of
the
this,
girls.
all this pressure. Again, telling us how to think, which is what most of us fall for without even actually realising it, unless you're consciously aware. And so that desire, like the detrimental impact that's having on the next generation, we can't even quantify that yet because we haven't seen the full hit of it. So there's
How do you feel as a survivor of feminism?
Yeah.
Are you there on the other side, you know, helping other women who are coming through? Do you get to experience other women who are having these difficulties dealing with these ideologies that are alien to our instincts and everything that we stand for?
Yeah, and I think a lot of with my experience, a lot of women don't understand the truth around the feminism movement, but what they do feel is dissatisfaction and being unfulfilled and being having to do so much, wear so many hats. The work's never done. Now that, you know, a woman's work was never done was said years and years ago before the demands of modern life. You know, you've got to still work like you've got no children and have children like you don't work. And those unrealistic expectations that are being placed on women are not only impacting women's mental health, they're also impacting relationships because there's a lot of resentment towards men as well. And that's not to say that men don't need to take their responsibility in a different way, but I can only speak from my experience as a woman. And I see that, but I also see it by design. That's what they wanted. So when it comes to the kids, getting the kids in their own bed and taking them away from touch, that's the child's needs being met. Now, I didn't really understand this.
But you did instinctively?
Instinctively, I did it. So I was at a point in my own journey where I was reconnecting with my intuition.
Because the indoctrination and the propaganda can only work so far.
Yeah.
If you've got a strong enough instinct and you're prepared to listen to it, you can break the propaganda and the indoctrination in a day.
Yeah, definitely.
You
know? But part of the propaganda and indoctrination is to disconnect you from your intuition.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. But when you reconnect with the fact that your body is giving you the answers a lot of the time, you just got to get in tune with it. Understanding then that when I had Bria, I didn't pay any attention to any health visitors. I mean, I had a good mentor, my friend. She passed away now. Massive influence on me on my whole journey. But she was a mum, and she was somebody who I looked at as a mum and thought, if I'm going to emulate anybody, I want to emulate her. And so she guided me. She was a really good guide, yeah. And she reassured me that I already knew the answer. I didn't need an expert to tell me. Only I know what's good for my baby. So we breastfed, co-slept, all the stuff that Gina Ford and all those super nannies and all of that was absolutely hate. But what I didn't realise is when my second child got to the age of 3 and he went off to preschool in forest school, I come across the work of a guy called Gabor Mate. And he works with addiction, but he talks about the fact, and there's probably a lot of writers that talk, but this is the one author that I'm aware of. He talks about the brain dynamic being developed between the ages of 0 and 3. And how that's done is through the child's needs being met. So these techniques to let the baby cry it out and not have them in your bed and don't let the baby win, all this stuff that's become the Western culture is the exact opposite.
Traumatise and torture the baby, yeah.
Because what that does, if you let the baby cry it out, the screams impact the nervous system.
I don't know how you could do that.
I know, but a lot of people are just blindsided by these so-called experts.
Well, I think it's not just that, it's their selfishness is encouraged.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what it is, isn't it?
Or not only that, this, you're back in work. So like if you're back in, like so even friends of mine who breastfed, that breastfeeding journey had to come to a halt when they went back off maternity. Yeah. Whereas for me, everything was naturally done because I worked from home, so I was all right. But understanding the importance of that brain dynamic and the development in it, because what he then, what he's concluded, he works with, like I said, he works with people with addiction. Every single person who has addiction could link it back to childhood trauma, and most of it in the ages of 0 to 3. Now, when that attachment dynamic isn't developed, the child is far more likely to go and seek that attachment as an adolescent with their peers. And that's obviously where addictions are breeding. So I was looking at that thinking, well, of course, that's by design as well, because it's keeping the world going round. Our addictions to phones, shopping, drugs,
what does he say the
else.
solution to that is? If you face childhood trauma like that, how does he say that you can resolve it, or can't you?
He's got now, hold on to your children.
No, sorry, that's the way of stopping it happening in the first place.
Yeah.
What if you've been the victim of that childhood trauma?
He's got programs. He's got like he works in.
There's no quick fix
in Austria or in Hungary. No, there's no quick fix. But it also doesn't mean that not every single person who's got that trauma goes on to be an addict.
Yeah.
But every single person who is an addict
has had that trauma.
Interesting. So like I wasn't even really aware of this, and I was like, I've done loads of things back to front in my life, but I was like, the one time when I just connected within, stepped into my feminine energy and just listened to what my intuition was telling me, I nailed it. I got it right. You know, and even the age gap between my two kids is just 9 days short of being exactly 3 years. So my first child got the full 3 years glued to me, and the second child did as well.
So 6 years of being a full-time mother.
Yeah. Now, if you'd have met me 15 years ago, I'd have been repulsed at that thought.
Yeah.
But
so the act itself changed it. The act of being the mother itself it was no ideology or education. It was just the act itself.
Yeah. And when I reflect back, when I was younger, and I'd be playing in the streets, I always played with the babies. And when we moved to Chilwell, I lived next door to a childminder, and I loved kids. And then again, I think I can link it back to the university course. Told me about the negativity of being a childbearer, and so I denied it and didn't want it. And even like I remember going to see my boyfriend's friend's new baby, and I like just went, oh. Whereas now I'd be like, oh, do you know what I mean? But that's how disconnected I was from it. So you know when you become aware and then you observe your own behaviour, when you look back and you think, wow, I was indoctrinated. I was a victim of that indoctrination. I was primed for it. Do you know what I mean? So
you've said a few things that have pricked my ears up. One is the Rockefellers and a couple of others. Now, when were you red pilled, and how did it happen?
So I was red pilled by my mate Kevin, who you know. He sent me the Zeitgeist documentaries.
I think that turns a lot of people on Zeitgeist, doesn't it?
Yeah. That was around 2007. And the big thing was understanding the banking system.
Yeah, because it was 3 parts, wasn't it? Yeah. It was the story of Jesus, which I'm not so sure about. Then it was, what was the second one? It was Jesus, 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the story of 9/11, which I already knew.
Yeah.
For me, the most revelatory part of that documentary was the money scam.
Yeah.
That just blew my mind.
Understanding the Federal Reserve.
I was like, wow.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of me then. But I've always been inquisitive, because even when I studied sociology, I was always asking questions. I never really took anything at face value anyway. But then when I became aware of that, it changed my outlook on everything. And then I had my experience within the criminal justice system. And then it sort of just expanded from there, because then another part of it was my business, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. That was another element of truth, discovering that. And then that led to health. And then obviously when I was pregnant, my friend Sarah just sent me loads of resources on vaccinations, and I just educated myself on it.
But do you think that, for me, is that when I remember my red pill moment was reading David Icke's book called The Biggest Secret.
Yeah.
And I can remember where it was. I can remember the couch I was sitting on.
Yeah, I can with Zeitgeist.
Yeah, and it just, wow, it changed my life. And I sent David Icke an email recently saying, I've never been the same since.
Yeah.
Right, but it was such a powerful moment, because it just opened my mind to the reality of what could be going on, and the whole scale of the deception that we're under. And since then, everything that happens from a global perspective or from a historical perspective, it's put me in a position where I'll question it first and foremost.
Yeah.
Is that I won't accept it, and I'll question it. And if the fundamental basic questions aren't answered, or people don't want to answer them, or will avoid answering them,
that's always a good sign.
That tells me there's something up, because people should be able to answer basic, simple questions about what's going on.
That's it.
Which, it sets us up to all different types of things along the way, which is why when the COVID happened, we knew from the off.
Yeah.
Yeah, well trained, well versed,
Definitely.
well experienced in knowing the key things that a government or media or whoever it is that's involved, the banks, will lay down these certain patterns that, and then they'll give you false information, but most importantly, will refuse to answer the questions. So how have you found that? Has your red pill journey been similar in that these other things that have happened to you, if you've used that as a touchstone to enable you to question and look for truth?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, because we live in the age of information, from when I first moved to London, I have never had a TV. So I turned my back on the mainstream media just naturally, just because there wasn't a TV aerial in the first place that I lived in. Turned me back on that. And then obviously a key part of being a barrister and a lawyer is research. So I was good at researching. It's a skill that you need. So I had that research and skill and that ability to go away and research something. But I was using the internet to do that. And I think, it's changed a lot. The censorship that we're experiencing right now wasn't like that years ago. So you could go, YouTube, and it's funny because people go, well, what? You watched it on YouTube, like, to discredit it. Yeah. But, there was...
So what, I'm going to watch it on the mainstream TV instead, like
and
the
just
BBC?
Be told. Yeah.
What, YouTube or the BBC, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So always just understanding and questioning.
Because 2007 is quite an early time to start. Have you found that you've been a lone voice for a period, and now you're seeing there's a whole flood of new people coming into the game as such? And how are you finding yourself as an elder statesman of the conspiracy movement?
It's funny because it's like, for me, 2020 has been a massive year of a lot of things coming into fruition. Including all the conspiracy theories. So in many ways I've been vindicated where people thought I was nuts, or, even my family would go, I'll have a day off. And I'm like, no, can't have a day off. I mean, my mum was peeling a tangerine once and she went, oh, these are lovely, they've got no pips. I went, well, you do know when they've got no pips at the GMO. She just went, oh, way.
I would have told you to have a day off there as well.
But I'm all in, do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's been interesting and also reassuring and comforting to see other people now. Like, there's, rather than being that lone voice.
Save our children. That's what I thought was so powerful about that, was there were so many women who've woken up, to the fact that kids are in danger and
and I think it's that warrior woman, that archetype that steps in, isn't it? Because that was an observation for me.
Because that activates women, you see.
Yeah.
Because previous to that, they'd been neutralised.
Yeah.
I think feminism neutralises women.
Definitely.
Yeah. So when women break free of ideological political feminism, is that the warrior woman is unleashed, and that's far more dangerous than
this is the thing
else.
With feminism as well, is that it's anti-woman. So the true power and qualities of a woman in the feminine are completely ignored and not celebrated over this trying to make women be like a man. Do you know what I mean? So for me, my experience, obviously, from being a mum and then continuously stepping into that, and I'm still stepping into it now, is understanding where the true power is as a woman. And it's not having, like, what are they called? Shoulder pads, and being in the boardroom and acting like a man. That's not where your power is. Your power's in your sensitivity and your vulnerability. And, so I've had to soften a lot. Not had to, but chose to, and lean into that a lot more. And now when I see women, an interesting one, I had a bit of a rant on International Women's Day. I sort of used it as an opportunity to put people, straight on what really happened. And I just got dead nauseating looking at these, like, empowered women, empower women and all of that. And, like, understanding that, like, for, like, that narrative of empowered women, empowering women, whilst at the same time, men's mental health is really suffering. And there's huge conflict between the sexes. It's like, you're missing the point. You're completely missing the point. So I had a bit of a rant, but it sort of got lost because everyone was talking about COVID, but it's quite a good post, actually. It took me ages to write it. But a lot of people just don't know, and that's because they have always took things at face value, whereas for as long as I can remember now, I haven't. I've always gone, well, what's really going on there? What's behind that? Why? And as a general rule, if the mainstream supports any movement,
go the opposite.
It's being hijacked.
Yeah.
So you've got to then go.
Just go the opposite.
Go the opposite.
Whatever they say, think the opposite.
Exactly, because we live in an invasion.
Yeah.
And so that's the starting point, is whatever you think, whatever you thought was right, it's the opposite. And then work your way back from there.
So with this newfound, true independence, independence of thought, and this liberation, true liberation from feminism, in a sense, you left your previous career and you went on a journey of motherhood, 6 years of, being there, dedicated to your children. How was you able to fund that lifestyle? Because I know you went into a new career, which can be somewhat controversial, which we'll get to in a minute. Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned into being this stay-at-home mum.
So I'd had me shopping bag eye moment and was like, I need out of this. So I was looking for ways to generate income. And all I kept doing was, like, I had a vintage clothes business, and on the weekend I would be travelling around to various different vintage fairs, probably make about £5 by the time you've paid everything with your fuel and your fees to be there for your stall. And so, but I had a good work ethic, and a bit of hard work has never ever bothered me. But then I was introduced to a concept that I wasn't aware of before. And like you say, sometimes it's controversial, but it's completely misunderstood. So it's the industry of network marketing, also known as MLM. And I was quite naive in the sense that I got asked to go to a meeting, listen to it, and because I had no preconceived ideas, I just took it all at face value. And I remember looking around the room and everybody seemed happy, glowing, immaculate. And I was like, this is well better than being in the cells. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I want a bit of this. Yeah. So I decided to start it. Now, it was only once I was...
Start what?
Start a business. So what you do is you partner with a company.
Yeah.
And the way that it works is, so obviously you've got entrepreneurship, where you're your own boss. This is intrapreneurship. And how that works is that you're still owner of your own time. You decide how much effort you put in and when you work. But you do it within the pre-existing infrastructure of another company. And that company takes all the risk. They do the legal, they do the marketing, they produce the product.
So you're like a franchisee almost?
Yeah, like a poor man's franchise, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, not nowhere near as expensive. But I set myself up in a business. I was serious about it. I had one objective, and that was to get to the top of the company. Because...
The top of the MLM company or the actual product, or are they the same thing?
Same thing, yeah. So within that company...
So a company can choose... A company who produces a product or service can choose to use MLM as the marketing system,
distribution model.
The distribution model,
yeah. And basically, it's just the same as what the internet did. The internet cut out the middleman, and that's all that it is. But the irony is that people have preconceived ideas because it's an industry that's evolved. It's got much better. There's regulations in place, legislation in place to protect the consumer. But it was a bit of a free-for-all, if you like, when it was first. And a lot of people are still...
Frontierland.
Yeah, and there's still sort of like... A lot of people haven't got first-hand experience, by the way. It's just someone who they know who knows someone who knows someone. Do you know what I mean? But that term, pyramid scheme...
So what is the criticism specifically of those systems?
So...
If you come in last, you don't...
Well, there's the pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
And what people perceive as a pyramid scheme. And I always say to people when they say that, they go, oh, so it's a pyramid. And I go, well, what's your understanding of a pyramid? Because sometimes people are being affectionate about it. They're not being negative. It's the only way they know how to describe it. And what they mean is that with you distribute the product and you help other people distribute the product. You sign people up or enroll people. And what the preconceived idea with that is you have to be in at the beginning in order for you to ever benefit from it. Now, that's not strictly true. Well, I know that that's not even remotely true because of the way in which the compensation structures are actually set out within these companies. It's much fairer because it's effort-based. But the irony is the true pyramid is a corporate structure because it's shaped like a pyramid. Yeah. So you've got the CEO at the top, you've got the board of directors, the middle management, and then you've got all the frontline staff then who were doing all the work. And it's not impossible, but it's very rare that the frontline staff ever ends up the CEO. Do you know what I mean? So you can, and also you're competing with your peers if there is, because as there's less and less roles, the higher up the pyramid you go. So you're competing with your peers, you know, with the people who you work with, your co-workers. So that's what a real pyramid is a corporate structure. It's a company. That's how that works. But because we live in an invasion, what the status quo has become is that, and it's continuously reinforced, is that network marketing, MLM as an industry, is a pyramid scheme, and there's something illegal about that because of the old pyramid schemes that were around in the 80s.
Just the Ponzi stuff, isn't it?
Ponzi, where there's nothing tangible being shifted, just money. And obviously that's not the case with a company that distributes cosmetics, health and wellness products and skincare. So, but again, I knew nothing about it. Typical case, head first in. And I did it alongside my legal job for 11 months. And then I got to a point where I think...
So you knew you had your route out?
Yeah, I needed an exit strategy.
Yeah.
I needed it, and then it delivered to me. And it looked nothing like what I expected that exit strategy to look like. Because I wasn't a product junkie. I had a skincare routine, but I wasn't like crazy on it. But what I loved about this company was its integrity. So obviously when you're working with criminals day in, day out, you're used to a lack of integrity all of the time. So to then be introduced to this company that's based on transparency, integrity, doing the right thing, and even that goes from how the products are formulated and disposed, as well as the ingredients, and then the infrastructure inside the company, the culture that's based on respect, abundance. It was just a whole new world to me, and I just loved it. I loved everything that it was. People were happy, and it was because working in law is quite lonely. So then I had peers, I had people to go on Christmas night out with, you know what I mean? So and
all independent people at the same time.
All independent people.
Yeah.
And all, from really impressive backgrounds as well. But who were just in a similar position where they feel like they've been a little sold a lie as a woman, sold a lie about what success is. And then you get there and you might have kids, and then you're like, hang on a minute. Now
so do you credit this to your ability to be able to be the more dedicated mum for the 6 years that you were?
Yeah. And so what happens is I built my business to the point where I was earning really nice money by the time the kids came along. So I was able to be at home, which meant that I was able to be present and just be the mum, the nurturer that I wanted to be. And it's only on reflection that I realised how powerful that was, because the kids started nursery when we were both ready, not because I had a return to work date. And that's true empowerment, when you own your life in that regard.
Totally.
But also more so after studying that work of Gabor Mate and looking and thinking like, okay, home-based business. I work it from home. I work part-time hours, which allows me to then still be the nurturer. And, I'd even go as far as to say is that, like, for women who are massively dissatisfied, I think it's a way to create harmony back in the home, so in the family structure. You can
still earn income without having to leave the home.
Yeah, you can still earn income. You get the professional fulfillment because there's titles and promotions and incentives and all of that stuff that we've now been conditioned to make us tick, which women still want. So you've got all of that without the pressure of being in the office. I mean, even that's changing now because of COVID. A lot of people are working from home, but the hours that are expected of are full-time hours, whereas this only really works if you work it part-time. You couldn't really do it full-time. It just doesn't work like that. So it's been a choice that I made, not on a whim, on a gut feeling. I remember thinking, I feel like if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. And I'd obviously was looking for an exit strategy. Nothing to do with what I'd ever done. My dad went mad because he was like, you've gone to London a barrister, you've come back an Avon lazy, what's going on? But I was like, Dad, I was like, you watch, Dad, you watch. And, and then, so I've actually been doing that now for 10 years.
Great.
And just in May 2020, I got to the top of the company.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's been a part of me year of fruition, is that title being achieved.
So you were talking, when we chatted earlier, you were telling me a little bit about, that's the real positive side of the professional story.
Yeah.
But you experienced something that you called the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the dark night of the soul, because it's always an interesting lead into a story, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was there was a lot of conflict between me.
So you'd come back to Liverpool?
Back to Liverpool. Conflict because Jay didn't want to be there. Conflict that when he did come back, I was like, well, I'm going to go to work now. So there was no like, oh, welcome home. It was like, oh, yeah, there's the baby. And I see that now, how like I was bang out of order. So there was a lot of tension between us. Anyway, we decided to separate after the second baby. And I then moved into a family home as a single mum. And I just remembered the day that it all happened, when all the furniture was in. I was breastfeeding my son, so he was with me, but my daughter she was probably with Jay. And just having that moment of like dread, like, oh my God, do I even want to be here? Like it was heavy. It was that heavy realization of like, you know, you've said all this time that you're an independent woman and that you can do it all on your own. But now I don't want to. Do you know what I mean? But I'd made me bed to the point that I had to lie in it. So that was a...
What have you learnt most about that?
In what regard?
In regards to now living that experience. What have you learnt about that?
How much you take a lot for granted. And how isolating that can be as well. You know, especially when it comes round to Christmas time and things like that, and people are doing things in families, and you do have a little moment where you're like, poor me. But on the whole, my view at life is that everything happens for a reason. Everything is divinely timed and how it is supposed to be. But what I'm adamant is what I've learned from that experience. So what I've learned from being in a relationship where I've emasculated my partner, trying to be too independent, you know, even refusing to ask for support, that's a trauma response in itself. So I would be in the next relationship that I have, I would be completely different. Completely different. I'm a completely different Kate now. So there's that, and also just an awareness of bleeding your wounds onto your partner. So like in relationships, a lot of, you know, even just observing people who are together, there's a lot of people who are just grown adults, but like really like kids because they've got childhood trauma, and they're in these codependent relationships that probably aren't best suited for one another, but they're codependent on each other, and a lot of people aren't really happy. Do you know what I mean? So having more of a conscious attitude to it, where understanding your wounds, understanding your triggers, and really partnering with somebody who is willing to go on a journey and to grow together, you know, really understanding that. And, you know, there's loads of things that I wish I would have done differently on reflection, like loads of things I cringe at in terms of my belief system.
Do you feel any bitterness towards the ideology that, you know, the state or the system imposed upon you?
I've got loads of bitterness for the state. Literally loads. Like, I every fibre of my being repels against that system. So it's just one of many things, really.
And how have you dealt with, you know, this new phase of your life? You know, you were talking about detoxes and, you know, expanding your consciousness, as we call it. You know, tell us a little bit about those experiences.
So after the dark night of the soul, now I understand when you have that dark night of the soul, that adversity that you go through, you probably do a massive expansion after that, because that's what tends to happen. So I welcome those dark moments now, because I know that I'm gonna grow from it.
But you learn from your losses, you don't learn from your wins, do you?
So as a result of that, so following that, I just had like a really crazy year in 2017. Like I had a rat infestation, like in my house, and the baby was crawling on the floor at the time, so we had to get out, and just loads of crazy stuff went on. But it was me, like loads of rock bottom moments, where I've then had to take a look inside me and then take radical responsibility for my choices and my life. So that as we closed out 2017, I remember sitting with my mate on New Year's Eve crying my eyes out. And she was like, what's wrong? But I just felt a bit of a relief that I was going to go into this new year, and I was adamant things were going to be different. So as we goes into 2018, I decided to do a lot of detoxing, a lot of internal detoxes. So I did a digestion, a parasite cleanse, I did a kidney cleanse, a liver cleanse, just decided to clean all of me insides. And what I underestimated, I did that with my mate, and my mate talks a lot about her own personal trauma, and I'm going, thinking I'm guiding it. Look, you might, a lot of like personal stuff might come up. You might get a lot of emotions. It wasn't it was me. I had like released loads of emotions, and it was at that point during those cleanses that I went and realised how I'd been in my relationship and decided to take responsibility for it. And so I did. I went. Jay was in Indonesia at the time, so I just contacted him and was like, "Look, I'm really sorry." And he was just a bit like, "Okay,
bit late,
bit late now," but yeah. But he was like, "Well, I'm glad that you've took the blame for everything." Do you know what I mean? Because he wasn't in radical responsibility, but that's okay. But I felt like a big weight had been lifted off my shoulders. That's what I remember being Kate. I felt lighter. So there was the feeling physically lighter for detoxing, but the emotions that I'd released, and as a result of taking responsibility, and then even having that conversation with Jay and going, "I'm so sorry I did that to you." Like that lifted a lot for me, like a lot of guilt then, because the guilt sets in then when you realise. But I was able to sort of address that with him. Yeah, and then so it was so that was 2018, and that was when I'd always been doing like introspective work, because network marketing as a profession encourages personal development. So whenever you work in a job, your training's all geared towards you being better at that job, whereas with network marketing, the training's geared towards you being a better you, because with what's available, you have to work. Only less than 1% of people in the company that I'm partnered with make it to the top, less than 1%. So you have to have a certain character, work ethic, determination and enthusiasm to get to that point. But the rewards when you get there are amazing. But you have to become the person who is worthy of that, or, just because of the law of compensation. That's just the way it works. You don't just get it for nothing. You'd have to become the person. You have to become the person. And obviously there's a lot with being from a working class background about your attitude to money and how that can change it and what success can do and people's judgment of you. So you have to work through a lot of that just to get to that, point. So I'd done a lot of introspective work, but then I really started to do like spiritual healing, got really into meditation. Went into the love and light, where everything was just like, where I just bypassed everything and everything. Think positive, And that's when Jay hated me. He was just like, "Who are you?" Because I wasn't like that before. But I had this, it's like the classic introduction to the laws of the universe with The Secret, and then like The Secret changes your whole outlook on life. But then you go and dig deeper and you realise that's very simplistic in The Secret. But you just go on that journey then, and then you're constantly on a journey of discovery. Still now, and I will be till the day I die. But then I've gone down. So I did a lot of Kundalini yoga and really understanding after I took radical responsibility for what I'd done in that relationship, going, okay, now I need to do something about that so that doesn't happen again, because obviously it's trauma patterns and all of that. So delved a lot into that, and I've spent the last 2 years heavily in that, heavily being who I am, who I actually was supposed to be before society molded me into what I thought I should be. And what I've realised is in 2020, the more myself I am, the better life is. Like things come to me in a better way when I'm just being me. I'm scatty. I'm clever, but I'm scatty. And I'm dead open about the fact that I'm dead scatty. Do you know what I mean? And rather than trying to be perfect, just being myself saves me so much better.
It's learning to live in your own skin, isn't it?
Yeah, and embrace that and really, enjoy it. Enjoy those moments and even those dark times as well.
So 2020 has been a mad year.
Crazy.
It's been great and it's been crap and it's been disastrous. There's all kinds of crazy things happening. Yeah. It's been one to remember, that's for sure. So looking ahead to 2021, because it's on our doorstep. What are your thoughts on where we're going? What are your thoughts on the vaccine? Because I know we didn't touch on this yet, but I know that you've done quite a lot of research into vaccines.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your insights on understanding the whole vaccine issue, the vaccine program? Because it's highly controversial. No one seems to have a definitive answer. It seems to be everyone's putting their opinions into the conversation, and you know, it seems to be the cloud that's going to hang over 2021 is the year of the vaccine, as it were.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, I am anti-vax, and I'm well read on vaccines. So up until this point, because what's unique about 2020 and this vaccine is that it's for the whole population. My concerns have always been around the fact that this newborn baby is being born when their immune system isn't developed enough, and they're being injected with all of these toxins, and the impact that has on the microbiome, and the fact that although strictly, you know, those childhood infections, not diseases, they're infections, they dramatically reduce because of improved sanitation before the standard vaccines been introduced. But there's a common belief that it eradicated those diseases. Now, even if we buy into that, that may well be, if you may believe that's the case, but that it's undeniable that that's been replaced with a huge increase in chronic illness. So that's always been my argument, was for children. So then when the prospect of this next vaccine has come in, there's the talks of what that vaccine contains. So aside from the safety aspect, there's the privacy aspect as well. And the fact that there's potentially a microchip, and it's not conspiracy. There's evidence of this. Just because the mainstream didn't say it, it doesn't mean it's a conspiracy.
Well, it's nanotechnology exists.
It's nanotechnology.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Klaus Schwab, who's a favourite on this programme,
yeah,
right, on the show, he talks about it openly.
Yeah, this is what I mean. So
it.
People go, oh, I like, is it?
Think you're mad?
I think you're crazy. But then you've only got to search his name and have a look, and that's exactly what he's talking about. Same with Bill Gates. There's actually a intellectual property, like a trademark, where Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have trademarked this particular form of nanotechnology. It's there if you Google it. So there was that's been the major concern for me, because I'm all for freedom, and privacy is a big part of that, as we know. So when COVID first came about, instantly I was like, right, okay, I know where this is going. Yeah. And everything that I'd predicted is playing out just exactly how was predicted.
It's because the script has already been written.
Exactly.
And if anyone that cares to go and research it, it's all there for you.
It's all there.
Yeah.
It's there. But the vaccine safety issue is a massive issue, because what I struggle to understand from a common sense point of view is that the numbers with COVID, the average age of somebody who dies is 82. The survival percentage of somebody who does have COVID is 99.96%. So all of these actions for those numbers, but then when it comes to the vaccine, they're like, oh, yeah, well, there's nothing without risk. In the first 24 hours, 4 people had an anaphylactic shock. Oh, well, it doesn't come without risk. But these are the same people who were saying it, and it's so contradictory. But what I find is those people are actually regurgitating information. They're not going, hang on a minute, does this add up? Because if they did, then they'd realise that it doesn't make sense. So the safety aspect is a key issue, but there's also studies about how it impacts the placenta and creates a continuous cycle of miscarriages in women. So
it affects the fertility of women?
The fertility, yeah. And
if you want to control population without killing anyone,
stop them from reproducing.
Stop them from reproducing.
And they've already got into the minds of some people, because, even from women are putting off babies for the career. They must be rubbing their hands together going, this plan's, working really well. I was one of those people. So you've got all of these aspects that, that impact fertility and, and population. But that's one aspect of it. And, there's overwhelming evidence of that. And then you've also got the fact that the Pfizer vaccine, the CEO was talking about that.
The CEO of Pfizer came out and said, I'm not going to take the vaccine yet because I don't want to jump the queue. He actually said it.
Crazy.
I don't want to jump the queue.
But then you've got the people who are in the queue, and you're like...
Yeah.
So I've got huge concerns about it, but I'm also rooted in optimism. Something inside me believes that we're not going to get to that point. We're not going to get to the point where you need a a passport, a vaccine passport to travel. Like something.
Will win.
Yeah. And that's why I'm acting. Because I don't think we should just sit back and allow the higher thing that's at play. I feel like we be rewarded for our actions, and that's why I take to the streets, and that's why I'm constantly sharing information and doing what I do. And it's interesting that people see you as problematic for doing that. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, well,
because what you're doing is you're forcing them to face their hypocrisies, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're forcing them to face their cowardice.
Yeah.
Because they're just hiding from it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who, you know, have the same suspicions as us, but they're too afraid, or for whatever reason don't voice them. But they'll hide behind the mask.
Yeah.
You know, they'll hide behind the mask, no problem.
And you've also got the fact that as a society as a whole, we're being dumbed down.
Yeah.
A lot.
But even saying that, in the same way that you spoke earlier about you were ideologically indoctrinated, the moment you had your children, that indoctrination collapsed and your motherly instincts returned in a second.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is with people too.
Yeah.
You know, the indoctrination, okay, yeah, it's powerful, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, but it can collapse in an instant with the right information and the right courage.
And all it takes is for you to go, hang on a minute.
You're right.
It's just that. Hang on a minute. And then once you start looking, you can't stop. You can't stop looking then, can you? Because it's overwhelmingly obvious once you start looking. And that's the thing, is like I said before, you're seeing more and more people who are actually doing that now, which is reassuring, which then instills me with even more faith. And I have my days. I do have my days when I'm like, we're doomed. What are we going to do? And then I shake myself off and I get to take to the streets again and crack on. But yeah, I think...
What do you think the future for Liverpool? Because Liverpool, it's difficult to describe, isn't it, at the moment, what's going on here? What are your thoughts in terms of how Liverpool people are breaking free of the communist stranglehold that they have over the minds of a lot of Scousers?
See, when I look at that, I'm actually shocked at how many people are still strangled. That Scouse spirit that I talk about. You know, it's like if you don't stand for it, if you don't stand for something, then you fall for anything. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to, at this time, you've got to pick a side. That's
why I think the arrest of Joe Anderson, regardless of what happens, is hugely symbolic. Right? It's like a watershed moment, isn't it? Because
definitely,
it's exposing the corruption in the Labour Party.
Because then...
I only use the Labour Party because Liverpool is such a one-party state. Fuck the Tories too. Yeah. Right? But it feels to me that that's a symbolic moment.
Definitely. And also then you've got the fact that when people start looking at that, then they're looking at the fact that he basically was bankrupt the Liverpool City Council and then was begging for us to go into Tier 3. And then understanding like the mass testing. And then, are we even allowed to say, because we might get censored, but 5G has been completely ridiculed, but we've got the biggest 5G grid in the whole of Europe, and that's because Joe Anderson sold us out for money that nobody's ever seen. So the arrest is surely going to make people go, well, hang on a minute.
What else is
there's
going
all
on?
Of that as well. Did he have our best interests at heart?
Well, no.
We knew that, but you would be surprised at how many people think he has. I mean, I think it's written all over his face.
Well, it's more and more evidence is coming out now of different politicians, specifically in America, that are directly in the pocket of the CCP.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to know, who's in the pocket of the CCP in Liverpool?
Yeah.
I think it's time we start asking those questions.
Definitely. And then drain our own swamp.
And drain our own swamp. Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp. Definitely.
That's a great pivot, to bring us to the end of this. So tell us about what are you doing for Christmas?
So I am going to Scotland for Christmas for a few days.
Why are you going to Scotland? You're not going somewhere nice and sunny?
Because I like to walk the talk and I'm not getting on a plane if I've got to get tested. So UK holidays are looking really appealing to me at the moment for as long as I need to have them. Staycations, yeah.
Staycation 2020.
So, and to be fair, the place where we're going is absolutely stunning. It's like a tree house with like a copper bath outside and like it's gorgeous. So me and my friends are going there. My kids are going away with the dad.
Okay.
So that's going to be a first of having Christmas without the kids. Yeah. So I've got mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, you'll be bittersweet about that, won't you?
Yeah, and I think that's why I don't want to be at home, waking up on Christmas morning like Kevin off Home Alone. Do you know what I mean? So that's my plans for for Christmas. And then as we move into 2021, I think a big sort of doing the MCing at that event, because I love public speaking. And obviously the foundations of that are in my career, but then in my legal career, but then in the network marketing profession, I'm a public speaker. I address audiences of thousands. You know, when you think about like what your purpose is and paddling the path of least resistance, like what's the thing that you're just naturally good at? Because we're all naturally good at something. And everyone was saying to me when I was at the back of the protest, Cakes, you need to get up there. And I was like, yeah. And I didn't really want to. I had resistance to it. But then, obviously, broke the seal, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Broke the seal, now can't get you off.
Yeah, get down. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I plan to do more public speaking in 2021. Educational rallies that we set up, because I think that was also a strong message from the last rally that we did. We obviously had a really poignant moment where we made a tribute to all of the losses, but it was also the fact that we're going to do this properly. The deception runs really deep with what's going on, and I think the best way to counteract that is, rather than just having really structured events, which we've agreed on, but having reputable people who can give education, you can educate there and then give resources for people to go away and really help people understand at a grassroots level, understand what's going on, to empower them. Because once you're armed with knowledge, you become untouchable. Once you know, like most people just don't know. So I'm excited for more of those events in January and moving forward, and pretty much going with the flow from there, because we're in a really uncertain time. And I think a lot of people are naive to think that 2020, the clock's going to go 12 to 2021, and 2020 is going to be a distant memory and everything's going to go back to normal. It's really not.
This is the beginning, isn't it, of a whole new phase of history. Yeah.
But the real problem with that is people's obedience. It's people complying with these ridiculous restrictions and rules that are completely unjustified and just disproportionate. So,
and unlawful.
Yeah, but the same
will be
people,
proved to be unlawful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. These same people who are naive enough to think that 2021 is going to be different are the same people who are wearing masks and socially distancing from the family members. So I think 2020 has been a ride. I think 2021 is probably going to be the same.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can catch up then and find out what's happened in between.
Definitely.
Kate Bentley, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. If people want to find you, where can they find you online?
Oh, I don't know.
Have you got an Instagram where you shut them all down?
Well, I'm shutting them all down because of the crazy changes that they're bringing in on the 20th. Yeah. So if you want to find me for the next few days, you can find me at Kate_Bentley1 on Instagram. Yeah. Or Kate Bentley on Facebook. But I mean, my days are numbered on those social media platforms.
Yeah, okay.
Million %.
It's been a pleasure.
Cool.
It is right. Thanks a lot.
Ciao.